She had been awake for hours before the sun even began to rise. The small apartment was quiet, except for the soft breathing of her little child asleep in the corner. She stared at the stack of bills on the tiny kitchen table, each one more intimidating than the last. The rent notice had a bright red past due stamped across it, and the utility bills made her stomach churn. For months she had been living on the edge, scraping by with long shifts at a cafe and an after-school tutoring job, and it seemed like no matter how hard she worked, the pile of responsibilities only grew taller. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped a cold cup of coffee, trying to wake herself fully. The exhaustion she felt was not just physical. It was heavy in her chest, pressing down on her heart with a weight that never seemed to lift. She had been proud of managing everything on her own, but lately pride felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Pride did not pay the rent. Pride did not keep the lights on. Pride did not feed a small child whose eyes looked at her with trust and hope, even when she had little to give. She glanced over at her child, who was still curled up under a thin blanket. The child's hair was messy and a small piece of toast lay forgotten on the nightstand. The mother felt a surge of guilt. She wanted to do more, provide more, give more, but life had been relentless. Bills, broken appliances, unexpected medical costs, and the daily grind of work left little room for anything else. She had friends, but most of them were in their own struggles, and asking for help had always felt like a last resort. But this morning she knew that last resort had finally come. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and stared at the blank messaging screen. She typed, deleted, and typed again, unsure how to explain her situation without sounding weak or foolish. "I don't know if this is the right number," she finally typed, "but I don't know who else to turn to. I really need help." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. She hadn't sent it yet. What if this message went to the wrong person? What if someone laughed at her or worse, ignored her completely? But her heart was heavy and her courage, thin as it was, pushed her to finally hit send. Afterward, she set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. Tears had been threatening all morning, but she had kept them at bay. Now she let them fall. She cried for the stress she carried alone, for the fear that she might fail as a parent, and for the exhaustion that seemed endless. The apartment felt colder than usual, as if even the walls understood her despair. She could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, the world moving forward while she felt stuck, trapped in a cycle of survival. She got up and went to the small bedroom to check on her child. The child murmured something in their sleep, half-smile flickering across their face, unaware of the chaos that had become their life. She kissed the child's forehead and whispered, "Mommy's going to fix this. I promise." The words felt fragile, like a thin rope over a deep chasm, but she held on to them anyway. Promises, she knew, were sometimes all a person could give when the world seemed determined to take everything else. Her day began in the usual blur. She woke fully, dressed quickly, and prepared a small breakfast for her child, using what little food she had left: eggs and toast, a few slices of fruit, and a glass of milk. It wasn't much, but she forced herself to smile as her child ate, pretending everything was normal. Normal was a word she clung to desperately, even when the reality of her situation felt anything but. The first shift at the cafe started at 8 in the morning. She walked the familiar route, the same streets she had walked countless times, past the same closed shops and early morning workers. The air was crisp, a faint chill that made her pull her coat tighter around herself. She walked quickly, not just to reach work on time, but also to escape the weight of her thoughts for a little while. At work, she was professional, friendly, and efficient, hiding the storm that brewed inside her behind a polite smile and quick service. Hours passed in a haze of coffee cups, orders, and polite conversation. She kept glancing at her phone, half expecting a reply, half afraid of what she might see. Every time it buzzed, her heart jumped, and each time it was a message from someone else, her hope dimmed just a little more. She tried to focus on her tasks, chatting with regular customers and cleaning tables, but the pit in her stomach never left. It was a constant reminder that her life was precarious, that one mistake or one unpaid bill could unravel everything she had worked so hard to hold together. During her lunch break, she stepped outside to get some fresh air. The city was alive with people rushing about, all seemingly in control of their lives, all moving forward while she felt stuck. She leaned against the cold brick wall and closed her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to calm the panic rising inside her. She thought about the message she had sent, about how desperate it must have sounded. Did she sound foolish, weak, pathetic? The questions swirled in her mind, gnawing at her self-confidence. She wanted to retract the message, to take it back, but it was too late. By mid-afternoon, the cafe was busy again. Orders flew in, drinks steamed, and the hum of conversation filled the small space. She moved mechanically, her mind partially elsewhere, thinking of ways to make money stretch, ways to avoid the landlord's calls, ways to keep her child safe and fed. She thought about borrowing from friends, taking a payday loan, or selling things she could barely afford to part with. None of the options felt right. None of them felt sustainable. She felt trapped in a cycle that had no clear escape, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her every move. When the shift finally ended, she returned home, her feet aching, her back sore, and her mind buzzing with worry. She quietly opened the apartment door, not wanting to wake her child, and set down her bag. The place smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning products. She flipped on the small lamp on the table and stared at the phone again, hoping for some sign of life from the message she had sent. Hours had passed with nothing. Doubt crept in. Maybe it had gone to the wrong person after all. Maybe no one cared enough to respond. Maybe she had embarrassed herself for nothing. Her child wandered into the room, rubbing sleepy eyes, and she hugged them tightly. "Everything's going to be okay," she whispered again, even though the words felt hollow. She sat down at the table and made a small dinner with what was left in the fridge, simple pasta and vegetables. They ate quietly, the silence broken only by small giggles or questions about school. It was ordinary, almost peaceful, but she knew the calm would not last long. Tomorrow the bills would still be there. The worry would return. The stress would return, and she had no idea how she would face it all. After dinner, she tucked her child into bed, smoothing down their hair and kissing their forehead. The child smiled and murmured, "I love you, Mommy." She pressed her cheek against theirs, trying to hold on to the warmth of that small moment, trying to store it in her heart for the long night ahead. She left the room quietly, closing the door behind her, and sat back at the table with the phone in her hand once again. The message had been sent hours ago. No reply yet. She stared at it, her thumb hovering over the screen. She wanted to check again, to see if anything had changed, but she was afraid of disappointment. She felt the tears threatening again, fatigue mixing with worry and fear. She thought of all the times she had tried to manage on her own, all the times she had swallowed pride and pushed forward despite exhaustion. And she wondered, not for the first time, if this time would be different. As night fell, she sat alone, the city outside alive with lights and movement, and she finally allowed herself to hope, cautiously, carefully. Maybe someone would respond. Maybe someone would understand. Maybe, just maybe, this one desperate message would change something. And in the quiet of that apartment, with the soft hum of the night surrounding her, she held on to that fragile hope, her heart beating with a mix of fear, exhaustion, and anticipation. The night was long, but for the first time in weeks, she let herself imagine that there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, that somehow things could get better and that her struggle might not be endless after all. The next morning, she woke to the soft sound of her child humming from the bedroom. She stretched wearily, feeling the stiffness from yesterday's long shifts, and reached for her phone on the nightstand. Her heart skipped a beat. There was a new message. She stared at the screen, hardly daring to breathe. It was from the number she had sent the desperate message to the day before. Her thumb trembled as she opened it. "Hi, I got your message. I'm not sure if I can help completely, but I'd like to talk and see what's going on." She blinked. Was this real? Her first reaction was skepticism. Who would reply like this? In her experience, strangers either ignored messages or, worse, used them for their own amusement. She thought about deleting it, assuming it was a mistake. But something in the words calm and considerate made her pause. The tone was polite, patient, and unexpectedly human. She couldn't explain why, but she felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt in months. After a moment of hesitation, she typed back carefully, trying to sound composed. "Thank you for replying. I honestly didn't expect anyone to respond. I'm in a really difficult situation right now and I don't know what to do." The reply came quickly, almost as if the person had been waiting for her response. "I understand. You don't have to explain everything right now, but if you're comfortable, I'd like to hear more. Maybe together we can find a solution." She stared at the screen, unsure what to say. Part of her screamed caution. She didn't know this person, had no way of knowing if they were safe. But another part of her, the part that had been suffocating under the weight of bills, sleepless nights, and endless work, felt relief. Someone had acknowledged her, listened without judgment, and reached out to help. It felt like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. She paused before replying, weighing her words carefully. I'm a single mom. I work 2 jobs. I have rent and bills piling up. I just don't know what to do anymore. She hesitated, then pressed send. Immediately, she regretted revealing so much, but it was out there now. The response came gently, almost immediately. Thank you for trusting me with that. I can't solve everything, but I want to help in any way I can. Can we meet and talk? I think it's easier to understand each other in person. Her heart raced. Meet? She had never considered meeting a stranger, especially not someone she didn't know. Her mind went through all the warnings her parents and friends had given her. She should be cautious. She should say no. But at the same time, something about the kindness in the messages made her hesitate. She felt an odd mix of fear and curiosity, and for the first time in a long time she felt that maybe, just maybe, things could change. After several minutes of pacing her small living room, debating whether to respond, she finally typed, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't usually meet people I don't know. I'm sorry, the reply was patient. I understand completely. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Maybe we can start with a call or chat over video first just to get to know each other. She considered it, thinking it would be a safer option. Slowly, cautiously, she agreed. A few hours later, they connected over a video call. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe someone harsh or judgmental. But the face that appeared on her screen was calm, kind, and approachable. He smiled gently, not in a flashy or overwhelming way, but in a way that seemed genuine. He had an air of confidence, but it was soft, not intimidating. They talked for hours. She explained her situation, leaving out nothing but the details that felt too personal to share. He listened without interruption, nodding and offering quiet words of encouragement. He didn't lecture or pity her. He didn't offer empty promises. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions, trying to understand the circumstances fully. Have you looked into any assistance programs or community help? He asked gently. Sometimes there are resources you don't know about, and they can make a real difference while you figure things out. She shook her head, feeling a mix of shame and relief. I didn't know where to start. I've tried asking around, but I didn't want to burden anyone. You're not a burden, he said firmly. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, and sometimes it's the right thing to do. For the first time in months, she felt validated. Someone believed in her. Someone didn't see her struggles as a reflection of failure, but as a challenge she was bravely facing. The conversation continued, covering finances, her child's needs, work schedules, and the emotional toll of her life. Every word from him carried a sincerity that made her feel less alone. She felt heard in a way that she hadn't in years. As the hours passed, she realized that the conversation had lifted a weight from her shoulders. It wasn't that her problems had disappeared, but she no longer felt completely trapped by them. There was a possibility now. Someone cared enough to listen, to understand, and to offer guidance. She didn't know what would happen next, but the human connection she felt, even over a screen, gave her hope. The next few days were filled with more messages and calls. He didn't overwhelm her, didn't demand anything, and never made her feel judged. Sometimes he offered advice on practical matters, how to negotiate with landlords, manage debts, or find temporary financial assistance. Other times he just listened, letting her vent, cry, and even laugh at the absurdities of her life. Slowly, she began to look forward to the messages. They became a small light in her otherwise dark routine. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful day at work, she received a message that made her heart stop. I'd like to visit and bring something for you and your child. Nothing too fancy, just a little support. Only if you're comfortable, of course. Her first reaction was panic. She had no idea who this person truly was. What if it was a scam? What if it was dangerous? But then she thought about the days they had spent talking, the genuine concern he had shown, the patience and the honesty. She remembered the kindness in his messages and the way he had made her feel safe despite her fears. Slowly, she typed back, I think that would be okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. She spent the next hours cleaning her small apartment nervously, preparing for a visitor. She didn't know what to expect, but she wanted to make a good impression, not out of pride, but out of a fragile hope that this could really help her life. She cooked a small snack, tidied the living room, and even swept the corners, something she rarely had time or energy to do. Every sound outside made her jump, every knock made her heart race. When the doorbell finally rang, she hesitated before opening. And then she saw him, taller than she expected, with a calm and approachable demeanor. He stood holding a small bag. He smiled warmly. "Hello," he said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding." For a moment, she was speechless. The presence of a stranger at her door would normally make her nervous, but the genuine kindness in his eyes eased her tension slightly. She invited him in cautiously, and he stepped inside with care, glancing briefly around the apartment, not judgmentally but respectfully. He handed her the bag. "Just a few things. Food, some essentials. Nothing extravagant. I just thought it might help for a few days." She looked inside, surprised to see groceries and a few small household items, things that would make her life a little easier. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," he said gently. "Just take care of yourself and your child. That's enough." They sat and talked for hours, sharing stories about life, struggles, and dreams. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't push. He simply listened, offered advice, and shared encouragement. By the end of the visit, she felt lighter, more hopeful, and oddly grateful for the mistake that had led to this encounter. The wrong message, which she had feared would bring embarrassment or judgment, had opened a door she never imagined could exist. As he left, he smiled and said, "I'll check in with you tomorrow. You're stronger than you think, but everyone deserves a little help sometimes." After closing the door, she leaned against it, tears streaming down her face, but this time, they were tears of relief and hope. For the first time in a long while, she believed that things could change. She didn't know how or when, but she felt deep in her heart that her life might take a turn for the better. And as she watched her child playing quietly nearby, she realized that this was more than just help. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human kindness could appear when least expected. Sometimes it could come from the most surprising place, changing everything in ways she had never imagined. The morning started quietly, the apartment filled with the faint hum of the heater and the soft breathing of her child still asleep. She moved slowly, aware of a strange anticipation in her chest. Last night's visit had left her with a swirl of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a tiny flicker of hope she hadn't felt in months. She thought about the groceries he had brought, the gentle words he had said, and the calm presence that had filled the room. Everything about him had been reassuring, almost like a small light in the dark tunnel she had been living in for so long. She set the breakfast table for her child, trying to shake off the nervous energy that seemed to pulse in her veins. Today, she knew, was different. There was a chance he might come by again, and while she felt eager to see him, there was also a nervous flutter in her stomach. She wasn't sure what to expect, and the unknown always made her uneasy. But she reminded herself that nothing had gone wrong the day before. He had been kind, patient, and respectful. That thought gave her courage. After breakfast, she cleaned the small apartment carefully, wanting it to feel welcoming without turning it into something it wasn't. She moved slowly, noticing how tired she felt, how every task seemed heavier than it had to be. Yet there was an unusual excitement behind the fatigue, a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, she thought, today would be the start of something new, something that could change her life in ways she had only dreamed about in quiet moments. Around mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Her heart jumped. She glanced at her child, who was playing quietly in the living room, and quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her shirt. She hadn't been expecting him so early, but then she remembered he had said he might come by, and that was when the nervous excitement bubbled into full awareness. She opened the door and froze for a moment. Standing there was the same man from the messages and the previous visit, but now she noticed details she hadn't seen clearly before. His clothes were simple but well-fitted, clean and subtle in color, reflecting a quiet confidence. His eyes met hers with warmth, and his smile was gentle, not overwhelming, but enough to put her at ease immediately. She had seen him on the screen and in her apartment before, but seeing him now standing there made everything feel real in a way that video calls never could. "Good morning," he said softly, holding a small box in his hands. "I hope I'm not intruding." No, she replied quickly, stepping aside to let him in. Please come in. He entered carefully, taking in the apartment with a look of respect. He didn't judge the modest space or the small piles of laundry in the corner. Instead, he gave her a reassuring nod as if to say he understood without words. She led him to the living room and he set the box down gently on the table. It's just a few things I thought might help, he said. Some groceries, a couple of household essentials, and a small treat for your child. Nothing fancy, just a little support while you figure things out. Her chest tightened as she opened the box. Inside were items that were practical, thoughtful, and just what she needed. Canned goods, fresh vegetables, snacks for her child, and even a small book he thought the child might enjoy. She felt tears prick at her eyes and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the sudden emotion. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you enough. You don't need to, he replied gently. I just want to help. That's all. Sometimes a little support is enough to make a big difference. They sat together, talking casually at first. He asked about her child, about her day-to-day routine, and about the small victories and struggles she faced that never seemed to be noticed by anyone else. She found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. It was strange but comforting to speak to someone who listened without judgment, who didn't rush her or offer empty words, but simply let her be heard. Hours passed as they talked, the conversation moving from practical matters to dreams and hopes she had kept tucked away for so long. He didn't just ask about her difficulties. He asked about what she wanted for herself and her child. If things weren't so hard, what would you hope for? He asked quietly. She paused, thinking carefully. It had been so long since anyone asked her that question without it being followed by skepticism or criticism. I want to feel like I can breathe, she admitted. I want my child to have a life where they don't have to worry about being hungry or missing things because we can't afford them. I want to be able to take a deep breath and not feel panic all the time. He nodded thoughtfully as if her words carried weight he fully understood. Those are very real and important hopes, he said softly. And they matter. You're not asking for anything unreasonable. You're asking to live with dignity and safety. And that's something everyone deserves. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief and gratitude she hadn't known she could feel. For so long she had carried her struggles alone, believing she was responsible for everything and that no one could truly understand. But here was someone who not only understood, but also wanted to help without judgment or expectation. As the afternoon light filtered through the small window, he suggested they take a short walk outside. She hesitated, worried about leaving her child alone, but he assured her he would stay with the child while she prepared. Eventually she agreed, feeling the pull of curiosity and the desire for a break from the weight of her thoughts. Outside, the world seemed different. The sunlight was soft, the streets familiar yet newly alive. He walked beside her, speaking about small, ordinary things, books he liked, places he had traveled, and the quiet satisfaction of helping people when he could. He didn't boast or try to impress. He simply shared, and it felt refreshing. His presence was calm, steady, and reassuring. For the first time in a long while, she felt normal, not like someone weighed down by problems no one could understand. During the walk, they encountered neighbors and passers-by. Some gave polite nods, some smiled. She noticed how he treated everyone with respect, from the elderly man sweeping his porch to the young child playing with a dog. There was a consistency in his behavior that impressed her, not flashy, not overbearing, but quietly confident and kind. She couldn't help but compare it to the people she usually met, who often rushed past without a glance. By the time they returned, her mind felt lighter, though her heart was still full of complicated emotions. He had been patient, kind, and entirely genuine. She realized she had been holding her breath for months, waiting for relief or hope to appear. And now, for the first time, she felt a sense of possibility. Something in her life could change, and it didn't feel impossible. Back in the apartment, he sat with her and her child, playing a small board game that made the child giggle uncontrollably. She watched them together, feeling a mix of gratitude and cautious hope. He wasn't just helping financially. He was showing kindness, attention, and care, things she hadn't realized she had been missing. Later, as he prepared to leave, he handed her a small envelope. "This is just a little something," he said. "You don't have to open it now. It's meant to help with whatever comes next in your own time." She looked at it, unsure what to do, but nodded silently. Her throat felt tight with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered again, but the words felt too small to carry the weight of her gratitude. As the door closed behind him, she sank into the couch, her child climbing into her lap. The apartment felt warmer somehow, not just because of the physical space, but because of what had happened there. The kindness, patience, and genuine care he had shown had left a lasting impression. She realized that this was more than just a simple act of help. It was a reminder that human connection could appear in the most unexpected ways. That night, as she tucked her child into bed, she thought about the man who had come into her life almost by accident. One wrong message had led to this moment. One simple choice to reach out for help had opened a door she hadn't known existed. She couldn't predict what would happen next, but she felt a cautious hope that things could get better, that she wasn't as alone as she had thought, and that maybe, just maybe, the future held more kindness than she had imagined. Before falling asleep herself, she replayed the day in her mind, the laughter of her child, the calm confidence of the man, the small gestures that had made her feel seen and valued. And for the first time in a long time, she drifted into sleep, without the gnawing weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest. There was still struggle ahead, she knew that. But now there was also possibility. And for the first time in months, that possibility felt real. The days that followed were different from anything she had experienced in a long time. There was still work to be done, bills to pay, and the constant worry of making ends meet. But something had changed inside her. She no longer felt completely alone in the struggle. The man who had come to her apartment, kind, patient, and understanding, kept in touch. Sometimes it was a message checking in, sometimes a short call offering advice, and sometimes another surprise visit with groceries or small necessities. Each time he offered support without asking for anything in return, and each time her gratitude and trust grew. One afternoon, after finishing a long shift at the cafe, she returned home exhausted. The apartment was quiet, and she sank onto the couch, rubbing her eyes. Her child was busy with homework at the small table nearby. As she scrolled through her phone, a message notification caught her eye. It was him. "I know things are difficult, and I want to help beyond small gestures. I have a few ideas that might make life easier for you and your child. Would you like to talk tonight?" She paused, feeling a mix of hope and hesitation. She had learned to be cautious, but there was a sincerity in his words she couldn't ignore. She replied, "Yes, I would like that." That evening, they connected over a call. He didn't rush the conversation. He listened carefully as she explained her current situation in detail. The rent that was overdue, the extra hours she was already working, the difficulty of managing her child's school needs on top of everything else. His responses were thoughtful, never judgmental. "I understand," he said softly. "It's a lot to manage, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed. Let's look at what can be done step by step. You don't have to do everything at once." They began to create a plan together. He suggested ways to manage her bills, including negotiating payment arrangements with landlords and utilities. He offered ideas for earning extra income without overextending herself, and he encouraged her to apply for small assistance programs she had overlooked. Most importantly, he emphasized pacing herself and acknowledging that she was already doing her best. Over the next weeks, his support became consistent. He didn't simply provide financial help. He provided guidance and encouragement that helped her make smarter, practical choices. One day, when her washing machine broke, she was ready to panic as usual, but he calmly suggested a repair service that wouldn't cost much and even offered to cover the cost. When her child had a school project that required materials she couldn't afford, he quietly dropped off the supplies without making a scene. It wasn't just the material help that mattered. It was the thoughtfulness behind it. The way he treated her and her child with dignity and respect. She had spent so long feeling invisible, struggling silently, and now someone cared about their well-being in a way that felt genuine. The small gestures added up to something much larger: hope, stability, and a sense that life could be manageable. He also encouraged her to take care of herself. At first, she laughed nervously, saying she didn't have time for anything beyond work and childcare. But he explained that her well-being mattered not just for her, but for her child too. "You can't pour from an empty cup," he reminded her gently. She began to understand that small acts of self-care, sleeping a little more, preparing a warm meal, or just taking a moment to breathe, were not luxuries but necessities. One evening, after a particularly long day, He suggested they sit down and talk about her long-term goals. She was hesitant at first, unused to thinking beyond survival mode, but he coaxed her gently. "What do you want your life to look like in a year? 5 years?" he asked softly. She paused, struggling to form words she hadn't allowed herself to think. I want stability. I want my child to have opportunities I didn't have. I want to feel safe and not constantly scared of what's next. I want to be able to focus on our future, not just survive today." He listened attentively, nodding. "Those are wonderful goals, and they are achievable. You've already shown strength and resilience, and now we just need to put plans in place to reach them. It won't happen overnight, but it can happen." Together, they started mapping out small, practical steps, budgeting, seeking additional support when needed, and exploring opportunities for better-paying work. He even helped her explore online courses to develop new skills, always careful not to pressure her but encouraging her to invest in herself. Slowly, she began to see a path forward that she hadn't seen before, a way to gradually build stability and confidence. Her child noticed the change too. There was less tension at home, fewer moments of panic, and more laughter. The small sense of security filtered into their daily life, creating an atmosphere that felt calmer, safer. She watched her child playing with toys or working on homework without the constant worry etched on her own face, and she felt a deep relief she hadn't known she could feel. One rainy afternoon, he arrived with an umbrella in hand and a small backpack. "I thought you might need this," he said with a gentle smile. Inside were essentials: extra clothes, a few snacks, and a few small gifts for her child. It wasn't just the items themselves, it was the thoughtfulness, the way he anticipated needs without making her feel incapable or judged. "You've been carrying so much alone for so long," he said quietly. "It's okay to accept help. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human," she nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. His words were not patronizing, not condescending, they were simply true. For months, she had believed she had to handle everything alone, that asking for help was a sign of failure. Now she was learning that accepting support could be a sign of strength, a way to survive and thrive rather than just scrape by. As the weeks turned into months, his support grew more meaningful. He helped her set up a savings account to prepare for future emergencies, guided her through budgeting for school supplies, and even helped her explore options for better housing when the apartment lease ended. He encouraged her to dream again, to think beyond the immediate struggles, and to believe that she and her child deserved more than just survival. It wasn't all easy. Some days her old fears and insecurities returned. She worried about relying too much on him, about appearing weak, about the possibility that this could all disappear one day. But he reassured her patiently, reminding her that his support was steady, that he believed in her resilience, and that he wanted her to succeed on her own terms. His consistent kindness slowly eroded her doubts and fears, replacing them with a cautious but real sense of trust. One evening, after a long day at work and a busy afternoon with her child, he invited her to sit down and discuss a potential opportunity. It wasn't about giving her money, it was about helping her find a path to independence. He suggested exploring a small side business, something she could manage alongside her current jobs using her skills and interests. He offered guidance, encouragement, and connections, helping her see possibilities she had never considered. "I want you to have control over your life," he said gently. "Support is temporary, but your skills, your confidence, and your resilience are permanent. That's what matters." She felt a mix of hope and fear. Trying something new was daunting, but the encouragement she received made her feel capable. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life that wasn't dictated solely by survival, a life where she had choices, opportunities, and room to grow. As days turned into weeks, the small changes added up. Bills were managed more effectively, her child's school needs were met, and she even found time to rest without feeling guilty. She had begun to trust herself again, believing that she could navigate life's challenges with guidance and support, rather than being crushed by them. The relationship between her and the man had grown beyond mere assistance. There was mutual respect, genuine care, and a sense of partnership in navigating life's difficulties. He never overstepped, never demanded anything, and never made her feel indebted beyond gratitude. His presence was steady, a quiet reassurance that she could rely on when the world felt uncertain. One late afternoon, As the sun dipped below the horizon, he brought over a small envelope with a note. "This isn't for repayment or anything formal," he said softly. "It's just something to make your next steps a little easier. You're doing incredibly well, and I believe in you." She took it with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the combination of practical help and emotional support he offered. Tears ran down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, relief, and a newfound sense of possibility. As he left that evening, she stood at the door watching him go, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her life was still far from perfect, but for the first time she felt that stability, independence, and hope were not just distant dreams. They were achievable realities. The guidance, support, and mentorship he had offered were more than financial help. They were a pathway to a better life, a chance to reclaim her confidence and sense of self-worth. For the first time, she believed that the mistakes of the past, the struggles of today, and the uncertainty of tomorrow could be navigated with support, wisdom, and courage. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she and her child were finally moving toward a life where hope was not just a fleeting thought, but a tangible possibility. The weeks passed, and her life slowly began to transform. The constant anxiety that had clung to her like a heavy blanket seemed to lift just enough to give her room to breathe. She still worked hard, still juggled her jobs, and still faced unexpected problems, but now there was a sense of control she had not felt in years. It was not the kind of control that made life perfect, but it was enough to allow her to plan, to hope, and to dream again. Her child noticed the changes, too. The small apartment felt lighter, warmer, and more welcoming. There was laughter during homework sessions, quiet conversations at the dinner table, and a sense of security that had been missing for so long. She watched her child sleep one night, the soft rhythm of their breathing a reminder that her efforts were making a real difference. She felt a surge of pride and relief, realizing that stability was no longer a distant dream. It was becoming reality. The man who had first appeared at her door continued to be a steady presence in their lives. He didn't intrude or overstep, but he remained available to offer guidance, advice, and occasional practical help. Some days he stopped by with a small gift or essential item. Other times he simply called to check in or offer encouragement. Over time, his visits became less about immediate needs and more about building confidence, teaching her to trust herself, and showing her the value of careful planning and thoughtful decision-making. One evening, he suggested a conversation about long-term goals. "You've made remarkable progress," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're managing your life with strength and determination. Now let's think about where you want to go next." She hesitated. Planning for the future had been almost impossible in the past because survival had always come first. But now, with guidance and support, she felt able to consider her own dreams again. "I want a life where we don't constantly worry about money," she admitted. "I want my child to have opportunities I never had. I want to feel proud of what we've built, not just relieved we survived." He nodded. "Those are excellent goals, and they're attainable. We just need to break them into steps, small actions that will lead you there." Together, they created a roadmap for her future. It wasn't filled with fancy promises or unrealistic plans. Instead, it focused on achievable steps: saving a small portion of her income regularly, exploring opportunities for better-paying work, investing in skills that could lead to independence, and maintaining a stable home environment for her child. Every step was practical, manageable, and empowering. With his guidance, she began to see opportunities where before there had been only obstacles. She applied for online courses that aligned with her skills, started small side projects that brought in extra income, and organized her finances in a way that gave her confidence rather than stress. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor, built momentum. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of progress, a belief that her life was not defined solely by struggle. The child thrived alongside her. With the stability and calm she could now provide, school became less stressful, friendships grew, and curiosity returned. She watched as her child learned and played without the constant shadow of worry that had colored their early life. She felt a deep, quiet satisfaction in knowing that the hard work, the long hours, and the support she had received were creating a foundation that could last a lifetime. Over time, she developed a routine that balanced work, childcare, self-care, and progress toward her goals. She had learned to ask for help without guilt, to accept support without shame, and to recognize her own resilience. She discovered a strength she had always possessed but had never allowed herself to trust: She began to feel capable, confident, and empowered, a far cry from the exhausted, fearful woman who had sent that desperate message months ago. One afternoon, as she prepared lunch, she received a knock at the door. Opening it, she found him standing there with a small package in his hands. This time there was a different energy in the air. He smiled warmly. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said. Inside were items that reflected thoughtfulness rather than necessity. A few books for her child, a small plant for the apartment, and a handwritten note. The note wasn't about help or guidance. It was about encouragement. "You've done incredibly well," it read. "Keep believing in yourself. You're stronger than you realize, and your child is lucky to have you." She felt tears welling in her eyes as she read the words aloud to her child, who smiled brightly. "See, Mommy? You're amazing," the child exclaimed. She hugged the child tightly, feeling a combination of pride, relief, and gratitude. It was a small moment, but it carried enormous weight. It symbolized not just survival, but triumph. Their bond with the man had grown into one of mutual respect and care. He never forced decisions or created dependence. Instead, he modeled trust, patience, and thoughtful action. He had given her the tools to succeed and the confidence to use them. She realized that his support had transformed her life not just through material help, but through guidance, mentorship, and consistent kindness. One evening after a long day, she sat with her child at the kitchen table. The bills had been paid, dinner was done, and for the first time in months she felt a sense of calm. She reflected on how far they had come. She had learned to manage finances, plan for emergencies, balance work and home life, and nurture her child's well-being. She had regained a sense of self-respect, confidence, and hope. She thought back to the day she had sent that desperate message, unsure if anyone would respond, afraid of embarrassment and filled with hopelessness. The message had gone to the wrong number, but that mistake had led to a life-changing connection. The man who had answered with patience, empathy, and kindness had opened doors she never knew existed. What had started as a moment of desperation had blossomed into a journey of growth, stability, and empowerment. Weeks later, she and the man sat together over tea, discussing future plans. He didn't offer grand promises or extravagant gifts. Instead, he focused on encouragement, practical advice, and shared vision. "You've built something remarkable," he said. "Not just for yourself, but for your child. The foundation is solid, and now it's about continuing to grow." She smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she admitted. "I was so scared, so unsure. And now it feels possible to hope again." "That's what I hoped you'd see," he replied gently. "The strength was always in you. I just helped you notice it." The months that followed continued to bring growth. She advanced at her work, explored new opportunities, and found ways to create additional income streams. She managed her home with efficiency and calm. Her child's education and happiness remained a priority, and she began to think about longer-term goals like moving into a better apartment and saving for future opportunities. Each small success reinforced her confidence and belief in herself. The child noticed the changes too. There were fewer tears, less tension, and more laughter. They started sharing small victories and dreams for the future together, things that had once felt impossible to imagine. She realized that the stability and hope she had gained were not just affecting her life, but shaping her child's life in ways that would last far beyond the present moment. Over time, the man's presence became less about immediate help and more about guidance and reassurance. He encouraged her independence, celebrated her victories, and offered advice when she needed it. She realized that the true impact of his support was not the groceries or financial assistance. It was the confidence, skills, and sense of security he had helped her build. One evening, she reflected on the journey. From desperation to hope, from exhaustion to empowerment, her life had transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. The wrong message, sent in a moment of fear and desperation, had been the catalyst for everything. It had introduced her to someone who saw her not as a burden, but as a capable, resilient person deserving of support. That connection had changed her trajectory completely. She looked at her child, now playing quietly, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They were safe, cared for, and thriving. She had regained her confidence and independence. And she had learned a lesson that went beyond financial help. Kindness, empathy, and human connection could transform lives in ways that money alone could never achieve. By the end of the year, life had shifted in tangible ways. Bills were managed, her child's school needs were consistently met, and she had time to plan for the future rather than just survive the present. She had begun to pursue opportunities she had once thought out of reach, and each step brought a renewed sense of accomplishment and pride. And though the struggles of life were never completely gone, she faced them with a newfound strength and hope. The experience had taught her that help could come from the most unexpected places, and that even a small gesture of kindness could have a ripple effect, changing lives in ways no one could anticipate. She realized that the true gift she had received was not just material support, but belief in herself, in her child, and in the possibility of a better life. She had been given guidance, mentorship, and unwavering encouragement, and she had used it to rebuild a life that once seemed impossible. As she tucked her child into bed one night, she whispered, "We've come so far, and we're going to keep going." The words were full of promise, confidence, and hope. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. And in that quiet apartment filled with warmth and a sense of peace, she knew that life could be better, brighter, and full of possibility. The wrong message, once a source of fear and embarrassment, had become the turning point that led to a new beginning. A life defined not by struggle, but by resilience, hope, and the power of human kindness.